I used a lot of palettes in February.
Wait, did she say February? It's July, right? July 20th to be exact. Why am I putting up the February palette roundup on July 20th? Well, that's a very good question. And there's a little bit of story behind it. And if you want to hear the story, then stay here for a couple minutes. But if you want to go straight to the palette roundup, then I'll put a timestamp right here so you can skip to it. The TLDW version of the story is that I almost finished editing the February video. It got set aside for something else. Then I forgot about it, moved on, and didn't realize until I was doing my April video that I'd actually never uploaded it. So I decided that rather than wasting all of that work, I would go ahead and put it up in July so that the series would not have this big hole in it in February. All right, so story time. I have, or at least I had, a rather small hard drive on my laptop because when I bought it back in 2019, I wanted a solid state hard drive. And at the time, getting a lot of storage on an SSD drive was kind of expensive. So I didn't have a lot of storage. So when I would edit videos, I would put all of the clips onto my computer and I didn't have a lot of excess space. So I would do the editing. Then once the video is uploaded, I transfer everything to an external hard drive for future storage. System works great most of the time. However, sometimes I have two videos in process at the same time. And I think what happened in February is that I had one that needed to go up sooner than the palette video. And so I took all of the files from the palette video, put them onto my external hard drive, worked on the new video, uploaded it, and then moved on to the next thing, and then completely forgot that I had transferred those videos over. Because usually when I transfer the videos to the external hard drive, it's done. So I think, in my mind, where was I? Oh, so in my mind, I think I thought it was finished because I transferred it over. And so then back in early May, when I was doing the April palette roundup, I was looking for that file because I wanted to put it in the cards. I had referenced it and I couldn't find it. It wasn't on my channel. And I thought, what the heck? Why did YouTube delete my February palette roundup? And I started digging and started looking, and I went to my external hard drive, and the final file wasn't there. So I went into the project file and realized that while it was almost completely edited, I'd never actually finished it. So then I had to decide, what am I going to do with this almost finished old video? And for a while, I just sat on it because I was putting up the April video and then I got behind and I didn't get the May video done and then I didn't get the June video done. And so then I thought, well, fine, I'll just abandon this whole project. It was a great idea. I dropped the ball and move on. But I still had all this work that I had done and I didn't want to just throw it away. And so I decided I'd just go ahead and put up the whole February and July palette roundup. You guys could see what palettes I used in February. You could take a peek into my collection and the looks that I created with it, which is still valuable information, even though it's July and it happened in February. All right, let's go back to February, Tina talking about the palettes, and I will be back at the end to wrap things up.
And if you want to hear about them, then stick around. But you might want to grab a drink and a snack first, because this is going to take a while. I used pretty much a different palette every day, which means we have a lot of palettes to go through. So if you love eyeshadow palettes, then you're going to love this video. So let's just start at the beginning of the month and work our way through. I first used the e.l.f. Bite Size palette in Cream and Sugar. This palette is part of my Out the Door in 24 project, and so you're going to be seeing it a lot. There aren't a whole lot of ways to use this palette. Typically what I do is put this in the transition. I put this in the crease and outer corner, this shimmer on the outer portion of the lid, and then this one in the inner portion of the lid. On the 2nd of February, I didn't wear any eyeshadow, and then I wore this again on the 3rd of February. It's an hour later. My phone needed to charge. I got cold, so I put a sweater on, and I grabbed a glass of wine. Let's get back to the palettes. The next palette I used was the Artemis palette. For this look, I did not take a picture, but the shades that I used were Entice as a transition, and then Prowl, this olivey green in the crease and outer corner. I used Quest on most of the lid, and then I used Scent in the inner corner. I thought it was a really pretty look. The next palette that I actually used 3 times was the Alice in Wonderland palette from Zeesea Cosmetics. It has this pretty glitter fall cover that's just so pretty. Zeesea has beautiful packaging. This was in my Panning Cats and Dogs project, and I can't remember if it was January or February. I think it was both because I didn't use it enough, so I had to keep it in there. But I did meet my usage goals on it, so I rolled it out in February. In one of the looks, I used these two shades, the lighter one in the transition area, the darker one to deepen the crease. And then I used these two shimmers, the darker one on the outer portion of the lid, the lighter one on the inner portion of the lid. I also did a look where I used more of the neutrals in the palette. So anyway, like I said, I used this 3 times, and I was really happy with the looks that I got from it. On the 6th, I used the Milani Bare Necessities palette, and this one I used every shade in the palette, and I think I came up with a really pretty neutral look. Now, I don't know, to be honest, if this is one that I'm going to keep in my inventory or not, because I have these shades so many times over, and I don't know that this palette actually is special enough to deserve its own place. And so this one actually might get decluttered, but for now, it's just going to go into the palette vault. If you didn't see my introduction to this series, the palettes that I use each month are going to go into a palette vault. Really, it's just a basket, but it sounds cooler to say palette vault. And I can't use them again until I get through pretty much all of the palettes in my inventory. Now, I'm not going to say for sure that I have to use every single palette, because at some point we're going to get down to a point where I'm not going to be able to create a look to go with my outfit or something like that. But for now, they're going in the palette vault to stay until further notice. However, I have 3 get out of jail free cards that I can use to redeem 3 palettes and put them back in my inventory instead of in the palette vault. I will go through all of my palettes, and then at the end, I'll let you know which ones I'm rescuing from the vault. The fun thing about this is, as I go through and use the palettes that I reach for over and over all the time, and then those palettes end up in the vault, the palettes that I have over here in these baskets becomes less, and I'm able to see what's there and be reminded of some palettes that I used to really love and use a lot. And one of those is BH Cosmetics Love in London. This was one of the first big girl palettes that I got when I got into the YouTube beauty space in 2018, and I just love it. It was one of the only larger palettes I had. At the time, I pretty much used like a CoverGirl quad. I had a few Mary Kay shadows and maybe a Maybelline. And so having a palette like this was quite novel for me. And as you can see, I do have Pan, and this one's almost gone, and Pan in this one as well. As you could probably guess, these were my transition shades. When I use this one, I put Scone from Crease to Brow Bone. And then I deepened it up just a little with Big Ben, but honestly, there's not a whole lot of difference between Scone and Big Ben. And then I went deeper in the outer V with Crumpet. And then for my shimmers, I used Prestige in the outer part of the eye and Palace on the inner part of the lid. And then for an inner corner highlight, I used the ColourPop Super Shock in Flexitarian. On February 8th, I used the Alter Ego Sahara palette. I love these Alter Ego palettes. I know that some people have issues with dupes, but for me, Alter Ego is vegan and Natasha Denona is not. And because I have a carmine sensitivity, that's really important to me. So even if I could afford it, I can't use Natasha Denona shadows. And so the dupes are really helpful for me. Started out with Sands in the transition and then went with Adobe to deepen the crease. I used Bronze on the outer portion of the lid. And then Mirage is a slightly lighter shimmer, and so I put that on the inner portion of the lid. I used Jewel for an inner corner highlight, and then I used Mesa as an eyeliner. February 9th, I didn't wear any eyeshadow, and on the 10th, I went with another BH palette, Summer in Saint-Tropez. And this is the palette I used to film my Valentine look. And I'll have that video linked in the cards for you if you're interested in seeing what I used and how I used it. The next palette I used was the Wet n Wild 5-pan in Petalette. And again, I used every shade in this palette. I used the matte shade here in my transition area. I used this darker shimmer on the crease and in the outer V. When you blend this, it kind of becomes more of a satin and less of a shimmer. And so it works for that. I used the deeper shimmer on the outer half of my lid, the lighter pink shimmer on the inner half, and then this kind of icy highlight here as an inner corner. Next, I used the Nicka K New York in Mocha Mix, and I really like these palettes. I have 2 of them. I used this light color to set from crease to brow bone. Then I went in with this middle tone shade here in my transition area, and then deepened it up with this darker one here, just went right across that middle row. And the shimmer I used was this one here. And then I went in with the ColourPop Super Shock in Ladybird, and put that on the inner portion of the lid. I did not put Ladybird in my basket of shadows that have to go into the shadow vault because it is a Super Shock and I don't want it to be out of commission that long and then risk drying out. I used the Tarte Unleashed palette on the 13th. I love opening this palette because it smells like vanilla and it just smells so good. I wrote down the shades that I used in this palette, but I don't know if it's just the lighting because it's gotten darker in here or what it is, but I cannot read them on the palette. So the shades that I use, just so you know, are Two Can Do It, No Fox Given, Monkey Business, Your Lion, and Swan Song. And if I could read them, I'd point them out to you, but I cannot. The Juvia's Place, the Nubian palette, is one that I haven't used in a really long time. And so this is one that has benefited from this rotation going through my palettes. There are no names on here, so I wrote down the number that I used. I used number 3 in the transition area. I deepened up with this one here in the crease and outer corner. And then I used these two shimmers, this one on the outer half of the lid and this one on the inner half of the lid. And then in one of my weekly Wednesday lives, I had a viewer request to do a look with the Dancing Green palette. I did film that. This is such a good little palette and versatile enough that you have a warm shimmer and a cool shimmer so that you can take this look a couple of different ways if you want to. And I was really happy with how that look turned out. We're up to February 16th and I used the Nobu palette from Temu. This one I didn't write down what shades I used, but I wasn't thrilled with it. Especially this shimmer. It's kind of thin, really more of a topper. The mattes are pretty decent, and so I haven't decided. Again, this is another one that I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it or if I'm going to declutter it, because while it is a nice neutral palette, I have other palettes that do this and do it better. One reason I might keep this is because I think it would be a really good palette to travel with, because if it gets broken, it was so inexpensive that it's not a big loss. So I don't know. I'm going to put this in the, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, but for now it's going in the travel vault pile with that Milani palette. I once again used the Be Mine palette. If you watched the video from February, you'll know that this one was one that received the get out of jail free card and went back in the inventory. It is definitely a contender for that again. This time I started with Soulmates in the transition area and then went into Darling to deepen up the crease. I used Cupid for the deeper shimmer that I like to put on the outer portion of the lid, and Flirty on the inner portion of the lid. On the 18th, I used this Nobu palette again, but this time I didn't take a picture because I'm pretty sure it looked exactly the same as when I used it the first time. Another one that I have not used in a really long time is this Deep Feelings palette from She Glam. And this is a very gray palette. It'd be interesting to see how this compares to the Natasha Denona Xenon palette. And then also I think ColourPop has one like this, and maybe even Beauty Bay. I'm not sure. But anyway, for some reason, this kind of looks blue on me instead of more gray, but I thought the look that I did with this turned out really pretty. I used Hazy Morning Crease to Brow Bone, Smoke Show to deepen the crease, In My Orbit on the outer portion of my lid, Silver Fox on the inner portion of the lid, and then Tundra as an inner corner highlight. We're up to February 21st. I used the Sigma Rendezvous palette. So for this one, I used Trist in the transition area, Bootleg to deepen up the crease, Maverick for the deeper shimmer that I like to put on the outer portion of the lid, Moonshine on the inner portion of the lid, and then I really just wanted a little more shimmer. And so then I used this e.l.f. liquid glitter. I don't remember if this is the liquid glitter or the liquid metal one, but it's in Comet. And so that was that look. I have a couple of days that I skipped here. The 22nd, I used Alice, didn't use any eyeshadow on the 23rd, and then didn't write anything down again until the 27th. But y'all, I went 23 days keeping track of not only which palette I used, but what shades I used. And so I think that deserves some recognition, because if you've been around for a while, you know that I'm not the greatest when it comes to tracking stuff, but I'm getting better. Do you need a little fortification to keep going? We only have 3 more days left. We're almost there. Okay, so on the 27th, I used the Real Her Dreams So Big. This is such a pretty rosy tone palette, but I've noticed some of the shades look a little bumpy, so I don't know if that means it's like going bad or if it's just like from putting your brush in there, and that's, I don't know, but I'm going to kind of have to pay attention to how it performs, because the sticker that I have on the back of this says that I got this in 2020. So pretty sure it came in an Ipsy. I used Envision to set crease to brow bone, Desire as a transition, Imagine to deepen up the crease. I used Ambition on the outer portion of the eye, Encourage on the inner portion, and Dream as an inner corner highlight. On February 28th, I used the Kaleidos Futurism 3 Astro Pink palette. This came in friend mail from Kim, and it is so pretty. I'm going to try to do this so that I don't blind you. I didn't write down the shades that I used, but I'm pretty sure I used those, and then maybe this one for eyeliner. And then I actually used one of my Moira palettes. I always have them back here on this little shelf because they look like books, and they're kind of fat, and so they take up a lot of room in my other palette storage over here. But I decided I would use one. So I used the Chasing Eternity palette. This is a beautiful neutral. It's kind of a mix of warm and cool tones. And I used Fave to set crease to brow bone. I used Hopeful in the transition area, and then Caution for the deeper shimmer in the outer portion of the eye, and Rewarding on the inner portion. And that is all the palettes I used in February. But don't go away, because I still have to figure out which 3 get to go back instead of putting into the palette vault. All right, I have 5 contenders. I have the Moira, the BH Love in London, the Sahara, the Artemis, and the Be Mine. Now, I think you all know that this one's going back. So that's number 1. And this just has so much in it, I kind of want to play with it a little bit more. So Artemis is going to get a reprieve. Oh boy, I gotta look at all 3 of these. I did not realize until I opened them side by side how similar these 2 palettes are. Wow. And honestly, this is a little embarrassing, not gonna lie. These 2 are kind of similar too. But I think in honor of it being one of my first grown-up palettes, Love in London is going to win the reprieve this time. So the 3 that get to go back, Sydney Grace Be Mine, Alter Ego Artemis, and BH Cosmetics Love in London. Okay, so now the series is complete with January, February, March, and April. I have all of the information and pictures for May and June, and I need to decide what I want to do about it, because I would love to have the full series. I have gotten through almost every palette in my collection by doing this, and I really don't want to just leave it hanging. One option would just be to do the May palettes in August and the June palettes in September. That's valid. The other option would be to combine May and June in one video. It might get a little long, but then that would also complete the series. And finally, of course, there is the option to just do nothing, let it end with the January to April series and move on. Let me know what you would like to see. Would you like to see the palettes that I used in May and June? And then what palettes I actually didn't use in those 6 months? I have kept all of the palettes that I have used from January 1st to June 30th in a separate location out of my palette inventory. And in July, I have been really focusing on using the palettes that are left. There aren't many of them. Most of them are quads or that sort of thing, the smaller palettes. And I have not been keeping track of uses or taking pictures of those. But I did pretty much meet my goal that I set in January of going through every palette in my collection, using it and trying to figure out what I think of it. There are some that are not going back in. And I think pulling them all out of the vault and putting them back in my collection is probably a video in and of itself. So let me know down in the comments what you would like to see me do with the May and June palettes. Maybe you have an idea that I haven't thought of, and I would love to hear it, because I really don't like leaving this unfinished, but I also don't want to put a lot of work into a video that nobody really cares about anymore. So like I said, let me know. If you haven't seen the rest of this series, I will put the playlist there so you can go watch them if you're interested. I hope you all have a beautiful, blessed day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.